Tuesday morning deal. We know we at least got one guy. Gary is kind of watching from remote. I'm not sure where he is, but welcome those of you who are watching by live stream this morning. Welcome to AIM. Sunday, we had live stream. A lot of people. How many of you guys stayed home Sunday? Did any of you watch by live stream? Yeah, we had 41 live stream feeds because we can tell upstairs how many people are actually logged on. There were 41, and I think the math is about 2.5 per feed, so about 2.5 people watching. So we probably estimated between 100 and 150 people were watching by live stream, which is kind of cool. So anyway, welcome. And this morning, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about, I can't remember when it was now, but there have been so many snowstorms. How many of you guys realize snow seems to always hit on Tuesday? I'm not sure why that is. But a couple of weeks ago, we had you guys take the gift test. Just a show of hands. How many of you guys actually now have completed the gift test? Okay. So how many of you have no idea what I'm talking about? Okay. Next week, for those of you who did not take the gift test, well, here's what you can do. If you just make a note, those of you who have not taken the gift test, make this note, and those of you watching can do it as well. If you go to otm.co, that's all you need to know. OTM for On Target Ministries, .co, not .com. Right on the front page, there's a little button right at the top, says free gift test. Click on it, and you're there. It's all automatic, all automated. All you do is fill in the drop-down boxes. It'll actually score your gift test and actually give you a report, and it'll actually produce a printout, the same printout that's on your table right now that kind of reviews what the different gifts are and how they work. So you're welcome to do that. And I'm going to just take a few moments this morning and debrief that test for you. How many of you that took the test were at the couples event that we did? Oh, wow. Okay, so this is kind of a little bit of a duplication. I'm going to skip through it really fast. And the last part of what I'm going to share this morning is a preview of what's going to happen over the next 2 weeks. Over the next 2 weeks, Steve is here. Steve's here somewhere this morning. There he is. Pastor Steve and I will be up here. We'll be on two stools, and we want to have a conversation with you. We want you to start thinking about questions that you might have having to do with biblical manhood. What is biblical manhood? What does it look like? What does it mean to be a godly man? And there is no question, guys, that will be off limits. We can't promise you we'll be able to answer all of them perfectly, but we want to surely give it a try. So we're gonna do that over the next couple of weeks. So kind of like the panel discussion we had a week ago Sunday on marriage. Okay, so the natural gift test last week or 2 weeks ago, I kind of unpacked what that is all about and how that all works. We went through some Bible verses. We talked about taking the gift test and answering all the questions that are on there. On a scale of 0, this statement is not like me, or 5, this is always like me. And coming up with scores in the 7 natural areas of giftedness, or the 7 natural gifts, sometimes referred to as personal, motivational, charismata gifts that are found in Romans. And the names of the gifts are here. Perceiver, I mentioned this before. Perceiver in this context, in the Roman context, does not mean prophetic, although that sometimes is translated prophetic. It does not mean prophetic in the sense of foretelling. It means that if you're wired in a way to where you're discerning, you're perceptive, you can distill a lot of different pieces of information and quickly arrive at the 80-20 rule. What is the 20% effort that will bring about the 80% result? That's what a perceiver is. Perceiver, ministry, teaching, exhorting, sometimes referred to as encourager, giving, administration, and mercy. Let me just go through those and give a little bit more meat to each one of them. But this sheet that you have in front of you, I would really encourage you to take this home and study it. because it really does break down all of the gifts. It even gives vocational implications. If you are wired a certain way, and again, this is very subjective, guys. These are not hard and fast kind of ideas, but they're subjective, but it will give you some ideas on what kind of vocational pursuits you might want to consider if you're looking for changing your career. Let me pause there for just a second. We're going to eventually have a table. We'll probably put it up here. It's going to be a resource table, guys, and we'll have different resources that we can get and bring to you on different subjects that we're going to be covering. When we did this years ago, we had people actually donate books to us. Pat Morley, Man in the Mirror, donated a bunch of books, and we would make them available to you guys on different subjects. On that resource table will be books and tapes and different things that, like Steve's book would be an obvious one to have there, Worshiper Warrior, for those of you who may not have one. In addition, there is going to be a place where you can place your resume. Talking about vocation made me think about this. So let me just say this now. If any of you are in a job change, you're looking for a job, a new position, and you have a resume, we want you to bring it here. And until we have the table, if you give it to me, what I do, bring about 4 or 5 copies. What I do is I just hold it up and let everybody know that you have a resume, and if people are interested in this particular field, these resumes are available. When we were doing this years ago at Woodman, we probably found about 30, 40 jobs for guys just by networking within our group. Okay, so if you have a resume and you're looking around, bring it, and we will help you in any way that we possibly can. Because oftentimes there's guys in the room that are that know people that may be in that area. Okay, perceiver is, as I mentioned before, someone who is very perceptive, is able to really look at a lot of big picture stuff and distill it down, and they're great at not only evolving visions, but helping build a structure that keeps everybody on track. They're typically good team builders. They're very perceptive, that sort of thing. Teachers, but if you're scored high in teaching, by the way, how many of you had teaching gift here? Several of you. It doesn't mean that you should necessarily be a teacher. The teaching gift, what that means is that you generally like to use life stories or life illustrations to impart truth to other people. You enjoy setting up environments within which people discover or learn lessons. That's kind of a little bit of a summary of what a teacher does. The perceiver is, again, someone who, let me give you an example. If a bomb went off right now in this room, and with nobody, it was all filled with smoke, and you didn't know how to get out of the room, perceivers, intuitively, they start really processing stuff really, really fast. They look at where is the ray of light coming in, which might be the best course of action, all of that stuff. If you're a mercy-oriented person, you're probably not going to do that. But the mercy-oriented person is someone that you might want to have around you if you're lying on the floor injured. They're going to have empathy for you. They're going to be there. They're going to try to take care of you. Meanwhile, the perceiver is using his gift to try to figure out what's the best course of action here to get out of the room. So that's kind of the difference between the perceiver and more of the soft-sided gifts, which I'll get to in a minute. Administration, sometimes referred to as the gift of helps, or leadership, I should say. Perceiver, teacher, admin are what we call hard-sided gifts. What that means is, hard-sided, soft-sided doesn't mean good, bad, by the way. Hard-sided gifts mean you tend to be very structured, very organized. If your two top gifts are in this area, you're a very organized, very efficient usually. If you go home and look at your closet, your clothes are probably all lined up. They don't touch each other. They're all color-coded and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that to extreme, that's what people are hardwired, hard-sided gifts would tend to be. How many of you, your top 2 gifts were perceiver, teacher, admin? Top 2. Okay, now, so keep your hands up for just a moment. I've done this before. Some of you guys have seen this. I'm in that way too. In fact, Pastor Stephen and my gifts are exactly the same, which is really kind of weird, but our gifts are exactly the same. Now, everybody else look around at these people, and I've said this before, you do not want to work for these people. Well, why is that? You tell other people, okay, that may be one reason. No, but seriously, if you really had a problem in your organization and you were bleeding and you needed someone to come in, no nonsense, cut to the chase, turn this puppy around, or you're dying, who do you want? You want those people. But as soon as, because they're going to really, they're not interested in necessarily building great corporate culture, or they're not interested in maybe massaging the team, or looking at employee morale. They're just, let's just get this job done. We got to, in the military, be like, we got to take this hill. Doesn't matter what anything else is going on. That's the goal. That's the objective. That's the people you want. Once they're done, you may want to find someone that, typically those kind of people actually enjoy moving on to the next challenge. Then you might be looking for people who want to come on board that might have a gift on both sides, that would be a little bit softer, be able to do a little bit more on the morale side or the corporate culture side. The other 4 gifts are what we call the soft-sided gifts, and they would be mercy, ministry, exhorting, and giving. And these, we say soft-sided gifts, these people tend to be not quite as organized, a lot easier to be around relationally. They're really comfortable, very warm, they have a lot of empathy and all of that. And typically, let me ask this, how many of you had both gifts on that side? Okay, so in a relationship with other people, if you're hardwired one way or the other, oftentimes there can be a lot of misunderstanding for people, if you're around people or married to someone who's hardwired the other way. Like my wife and I are completely opposite. How many of you found that to be the case in your couples event, where you can see the same thing, but you're looking at it through 2 entirely different lenses? And so what we say at the couples seminar is this: a sign of spiritual maturity in a relationship is when you recognize each other's differences and you can defer to them without judging them or without beating each other up with your differences. With understanding that, because the tendency is, and this all has to do with pride, the tendency is, I'm seeing it this way, so obviously it must be right, because that's the way I see it. And my wife can look at exactly the same thing and see it entirely differently. She wouldn't be someone who would come and say, I'm obviously right. She's much more softer-sided, much kinder when it comes to these sorts of things. But I have to honor that. I have to be able to honor that. And the same thing is true with each other, guys. You're going to be around other men that are not wired the same way you are. We can't judge them. We have to recognize that God has wired them differently. They see life through a different lens, and we need to honor that. And we need to allow them to help us form a godly perspective on whatever it is that we're looking at. Does that make sense? Okay, so in the context of a relationship, I think I shared this at the couples event. My wife and I see things through 2 different lenses, and what we're learning over time is to defer to each other. The difficulty has always been for me, because I'm the man and I'm supposed to be the spiritual head of my home. Typically, I feel it's my responsibility to make decisions or to see things a certain way and move in that direction. And I have to set my pride aside and say, no, I need to let my wife temper that. And the more I do that, the less trouble I get into, by the way. And the more I realize that I've got to really defer to her a lot more than I might want to. And I think that's, again, an example of how we need to be with each other as men as well. I've covered this a lot with the couples event. I don't know if I want to unpack it any further, because there's something else I want to share with you real quick before we go into a discussion time. But let me have some questions from any of you regarding this that I need to unpack a little further. Any questions or thoughts about anything I've shared so far? I didn't hear that. What do you say?
Well, there's a difference. both hard and soft.
Yeah, okay, if you got one on each side, okay, let me unpack that just a little bit. If you've got one on each side, here's the thing. If you're searching, which is where we're going, by the way, in the next several months, if you're searching for your destiny, if you're searching for God's purpose for your life, if you're hardwired on one side or the other, the good news is that you are probably going to find it a little easier to discover your destiny or that one thing God wants you to do. Why? Because he's wired you in such a way to where your options are not going to be as broad. You're going to probably find that you're going to be, if you're a soft-sided person, it might be that, you've got a missions orientation. If you're a hard-sided person, the kind of things God might lead you into might have more to do with developing something or building something or projects or those sorts of things. It might be a little easier for you to refine your search. If you've got one on both sides, the good news is you're open to a much broader range of possibilities. The bad news is it's a little more confusing to find that exact thing that God is calling you into. Does that make sense? So, but the people with one on each side, both of mine are hard-sided. And I'm learning to be a more of a softer-sided person. It's a learned behavior, and your learned behavior can affect these gifts, by the way, as we grow older. But I admire people who have a strong gift on both sides because they're open to a much broader range of possibilities. That's a person you come in that can really run an organization and see it from two really far extremes and is not as limited. So that's what that means if you have a gift on both sides. Any other unpacking that I need to do? Because I've already done this with so many of you. Yes, Steve? Yeah. 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 That's exactly right. Yeah. 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 Yeah, in fact, my definition, I teach a lot on leadership, and I've got my new definition of leadership. It wasn't my old definition, by the way. My new definition of leadership is that you're not a leader unless those following you truly believe that you're more interested in their benefit than you are yourself. You're more interested in them, and you're concerned about them more than you are yourself. That's real leadership. But in the early days of my leadership, I was the guy in front with the rope tied to everybody pulling them. You know, by the way, Jesus was not in front pulling, nor was he behind pushing. Jesus, the Bible says, was what? With them. And they were with him along the way. And that's such a powerful and beautiful picture of leadership. We'll unpack at another time when we get into leadership, which we'll do later on in this series. But here's a practical example. And when I was a young leader, I was a bully, and everybody had to follow me. If I look back, I had like 2,000 or 3,000 people in the business that I was a part of that were technically under me, but none of them wanted to be. Because I was a pretty brutal guy. And then as I began to grow, I began doing this, exactly what Steve is talking about, beginning to think more and more about the implications of my leadership upon other people. So I was a store manager, and we had a department. We had different departments. This is a retail store, kind of like a Home Depot. We had a department, and we had one huge wall, probably as big as that whole wall over there, and floor to ceiling with shutters little shutters that you could buy, shutter doors all the way down to little bitty shutters. And all of the big shutter doors, 80-inch doors, were on the bottom, so you could pull them out, and then all the way up. And then the little bitty shutters were way up on top, so you needed a ladder to go get one. And so if you had a customer, you couldn't get that when you had to have a salesperson help you, which we wanted them to do, but you couldn't serve yourself. So I had an idea on how we could better merchandise this that ended up going to all 150 of our stores eventually. But I had this idea. Now, I could have gone to the guy who has that department and told him to just go ahead and reverse it. In other words, take the erector set apart, put all the little shutters at the bottom, the big doors on top, so that when you walk over to the wall, even though the big doors are on top, they're down low enough to where you could grab one and pull it down, and you don't need a ladder. Okay? You follow me? Now, I could have gone and told him to do that, but I didn't do that. I said, this is a problem. What do you think we could do to help customers be able to get those doors without having to have a ladder? And I stayed talking to this guy until he came up with the idea. And then I went, oh, wow, what a great idea. Okay? And then he went ahead and he did it. Now, what do you think that guy's motivation level was as a result of that kind of leadership? Huh? There's a difference between telling him to go do it versus it being his idea and being rewarded for it. And that's kind of what you're talking about, I think. And as we get older, we learn more and more about those things. Yeah?
One of the critical things about leadership that I've found, whether you're taking rocket fuel, is foundation. If you're building on the foundation of God, Jesus Christ, and His cornerstone, what happens is whatever your type is, I believe, the filling of the Spirit transforms. You get some of those soft things and work through it. Over the course of time and maturity, the building of the Holy Spirit doesn't necessarily change your attitude, building a foundation. But what it does change and transform you into a kingdom leader as opposed to just a very worldly.
Yeah.
That's one of the things we're working with our marriage small group is this is what it's like when you're not spirit-filled. This is what it's like when you are spirit-filled. And here's the thing, the most critical relationship you have in marriage, that filling of the Spirit will transform you more than the building. So that's, the foundation is good. The cornerstone of Jesus Christ on that foundation.
Absolutely. In fact, everything we're talking about here has to be submitted to the Lord. And that submission to the Holy Spirit is what makes it really, really work very beautifully. I don't know if everybody could hear that. We probably need to, when we do these open discussions, probably, especially for people watching online, need to get a mic that we can roam around with. Let me just put a comma here for a second and just give you guys a little bit of a preview. I was up really, really early this morning. Last night we went to watch Free Burma Rangers. How many of you have seen that movie? Yeah, you walk away from that movie thinking, man, what am I doing? look at what these guys are doing, and look at the danger they're putting themselves in. And it's really, really powerful. I was up this morning very, very early. In fact, I got here probably really early this morning thinking about this whole idea of biblical manhood, which Steve and I will be unpacking. And I thought about David Eubank, and I thought, well, this is what biblical manhood kind of looks like for me. And years ago, many, many years ago, I developed something that really should be a book, by the way. I don't know, maybe I'm supposed to co-write it with Steve or something. I hate writing, but I've got so many ideas for books, and I need to kick myself and get it going. But I came up with this thing called, what I call the 5 C's of biblical manhood. And if you notice the logo in the background, it's kind of interesting. If you look at it, I don't know if you can see it through the 5 C's thing, but from the top it looks like there are 5 COs, so it's a CO, because all 5 of these start with CO. But if you look at it from the top, it's 5 guys in a circle. See that? You see their head on top and their arms out, or their arms up. And the beauty of this logo is there are 5 guys in a circle, back to back. I think I've demonstrated that with you guys, how when you start a small group, you're kind of like, you don't not even have arm's length, then you link your arms, and then you kind of form a circle, and you're tight, and then eventually, as you grow and mature, you can go back to back with guys and really do damage to the enemy. You won't go back to back with someone, by the way, you first don't go face to face with. That's also true with our relationship with God. So there's a lot of symbolism in even the logo, which took a lot of time to develop. But the 5 C's of biblical manhood are, let me just go through them. Compassion, conviction, I'll leave it up here in a minute. Commitment, confidence, and courage. Those are the 5 C's of biblical manhood. And when I developed this years ago, I realized that there's a transition that needs to happen if you're going to be a biblical man. And that the problem we have is that we don't go through this transition. You can't get to courage. Every one of these requires the one prior in order to build. A lot of pastors I talk to, they all say the same thing: I can't get my men to be committed. Well, you're never going to get a man to be committed to anything unless he unpacks the idea of godly compassion and godly conviction. And when you go through these things, godly compassion is the idea of my relationship with God. Love the 2 greatest commandments. Love the Lord your God and your neighbor as yourself. You got to develop that kind of love, and that can only happen as we're intimate with the Lord. So godly compassion then leads to godly conviction. I know the Word of God, and I believe the Word of God. I'm convicted that this is truth and this is the right course for my life. It's only when you arrive at that point, and by the way, I'm going very quickly, these things, each one of these things could take weeks and weeks. In fact, we have a whole curriculum we started to develop that could take a whole year to build on these things. And then when I'm there, that leads me to a place where I can be committed. I now have godly commitment. And I am not making a decision. I'm making a commitment with every fiber of my being. I'm going to do this. And as I do that, and the outworking of that, and as I see the benefits of that, it develops into godly confidence. I'm now confident because of all of this, that I'm right where I need to be, and I've got everything I need, and I'm hitting on all cylinders. And ultimately, that leads to godly courage. I say sometimes that we've moved from the home of the free and the brave in our country to a land filled with slaves and cowards. We are ideological slaves and practical cowards. It's hard to find anybody anymore that's willing to die for anything. And, I say this, Osama bin Laden, you can say what you want about him, but he was a discipler of men. When you can get somebody to strap on a bomb and go kill themselves for what they believe God is, I mean, that's commitment, guys. We need to have that same kind of sense when it comes to serving our God. And when I watched that movie, my thought about watching Dave is that that's the reason why he could display that courage is because he's gone through all those. I can guarantee you he's gone through all those. So that's where we're going, and this is a conversation, and eventually we'll unpack these 5 C's and maybe some teachings along the way as well, but we want to kind of touch on these as we go through the process. But for this morning, for the balance of our time, what I'd like you to do is this. You can talk about the implications. In fact, if I go back, let me just go back to that and put the last slide back on. If you want to have a conversation about your gifts, the life application questions for us today: can you think of a situation where you can see how your response was tied to your natural gift? Something that you responded to or something you did, either positive or negative, you approached it because of the way God wired you. And how might you use this information to help discover God's plan for your life, which we'll continue to unpack here later on. An example of that might be, sometimes, I've said this before, the way you discover God's greater plan for your life is as you understand what your natural gift is, and you begin to move out in that trajectory, God sometimes opens the greater purpose or the bigger door. For instance, if you're wired in such a way to where it might make sense that to go on a missions trip, or that you're ministry or mercy oriented, maybe by stepping out in that area, God begins to reveal the bigger picture, the bigger idea. The same thing could be true on the other side. If you're more of an organizational kind of person, maybe you take on a task, maybe within the church or someplace even vocationally, where you're moving in that direction, and sometimes because you're hitting on all your right cylinders, God begins to burst something that you can see is the purpose or the direction that he wants to take you. Talk about that kind of stuff, guys, and then be thinking about questions also you might want to ask beginning next week on in the area of biblical manhood. Okay, so go ahead and take the rest of the time and let the leaders decide. Be sure and allow a little time at the end, guys, to pray with and for each other. Something we always want to do in our group discussions.